Started off. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for your patience. I am Aaron Blumberg, Swiftland's Continuing Education Coordinator, and it is my pleasure to finally welcome you all to the basics of XML, mods, and EAD. Excuse me. We have a wonderful learning opportunity ready for you this morning with Dr. Karen Snow. Dr. Snow is an assistant professor in the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois. She received her PhD in Information Science in 2011 from the University of North Texas, where she taught cataloging courses primarily online from 2006 until 2011 for the Department of Library and Information Sciences. She previously worked as a cataloger in the Rare Book Room, University Archives, and the Technical Services Department at the University of North Texas. She currently teaches beginning and advanced cataloging courses at Dominican University, both face-to-face and online. Please welcome Dr. Snow and enjoy her webinar this morning. Dr. Snow.
Thank you, Aaron, so much. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Happy Friday. And yeah, just by the way, as Luli says, the link to this will be available as well as the actual PowerPoint itself. That's my understanding that you guys will get this. So don't feel like you have to frantically write everything down. I promise. It'll be fine. So this is the third in the series of 3 webinars, and the kind of culminating, I guess, I've been discussing with Luli and Aaron with a workshop, a face-to-face workshop in January, by the way, and sorry I haven't gotten the description out to you guys yet. It's been kind of a crazy week. What I'm hoping to do with that workshop is kind of taking what you guys have learned from these webinars and make it like really hands-on, like really get you guys, doing some, coding and things like that, so you can kind of experience, cataloging using different types of metadata standards. So if that sounds interesting to you, then please join me in January for that workshop. So in the meantime, I just want to give you guys kind of a taste, right? A little taste of these XML based standards. First of all, just talking about XML in general. Okay, so what is XML? What is that, and why should we care about it? And then kind of give you a little introduction to several standards where you can use XML and several that are actually XML based. Like, so we can use XML with Dublin Core, which is what we discussed last time, and then there's mods and EAD, which are XML based standards. Just to give kind of give you a taste of kind of what's out there and why we have these different standards. Which like, why don't we just use Mark for everything, right? Some of you may, what do you mean we have Mark? What's wrong with Mark? Well, okay, we'll talk about that. There's other standards out there that we can use for different types of materials. So that Mark may not be great at describing. So okay, so let's begin our journey, right? So as always, just feel free to type any questions or anything you have in the chat box, and I'll be kind of monitoring that for you guys, in case you do have something that you want to ask me about. So here I keep showing this one slide I've showed it for the last couple webinars, just to kind of once again make sure that we understand that when we're talking about metadata standards, there's many out there. I mean, just like when you create a MARC record, right? So those of you guys who are catalogers, who are used to working with MARC records, you're used to actually using multiple standards at the same time, really. If you think about it, right? You have MARC, and then you use like RDA or AACR2 as your content standard. MARC is the encoding standard, and then you like Library of Congress subject headings. Your control vocabularies and all sorts of stuff, right? You use multiple standards to construct one record. So the same thing, same concept, right? Same concept here, where you're looking at an XML encoded Dublin Core record here. So I kind of color-coded this so you can kind of see the difference here. So structure standards being, like the actual like element names, for example, like Dublin Core is a structure standard. But you can encode Dublin Core in XML. So this is an XML record or document, and that's the encoding standard in green. That's part of that, and then the blue being the content standard, right? How we kind of construct the values of that. So keep that in mind as we move through this. That metadata standards, they may not do everything, right? So like mods, for example, we'll talk about. The mods doesn't really dictate what you put in the value, as far as the content is concerned. It just kind of dictates, the structure, and then XML, the encoding. So just kind of make sure you kind of keep that in mind. So at first, I'm just going to introduce you guys to XML. If you're not familiar with XML, it is a markup language, so a system of annotating a document in a way that is syntactically distinguishable from the text. So here's just an example of XML. And you can, make XML documents out of anything. You can just kind of make up the elements. It's fine. XML is just really, it's a syntax, right? It's a syntax that we can use to encode documents. Like I said, just like it says here, annotating a document in a way that's syntactically distinguishable from the text. And it's from a family of markup languages. Okay, so beginning with HSGML, the standard generalized markup language. This is from the 80s. Okay, so it's been around for a while. This is just kind of like the big mama bear standard here, the markup language, which was created to address challenges regarding to large-scale publishing of electronic documents. Really, all of these markup languages were designed to address issues really with electronic or digital resources. Okay, so keep that in mind. And from that hatched HTML, which in the early 90s, which I'm assuming most of you guys are at least familiar with that. HTML, right? Hypertext markup language, because it's the language of the web, right? It's what most of the web pages out there at least have some HTML on there, designed to address challenges related to display. Okay, so it's like a presentation standard. Okay, a display of web documents. XML, once again from the same family, extensible markup language, came a little bit later, but still, from almost 20 years ago, right? Designed to address challenges related to the content and structure of data. So it really doesn't have much to do, at least just basic XML, having to do with how it is displayed or presented. It's more about marking up the content so the system knows, okay, this is the element and so forth, and this is not, and the attribute and so forth. And so it's just really kind of key, because they seem on the surface to be very similar. Okay, so they look very similar to the untrained eye, but like I said, HTML was designed for web content for display, for presentation, and it's formatted for human readers rather than for web content is currently formatted for human readers rather than programs. But XML deals with the content and structure of documents that allow for the creation of discrete machine actionable data elements and values. Okay, so I'll kind of go through just a couple examples to make sure that we're clear on the difference between the two. So here's just something that I made up, kind of adapted from the particular example that I didn't like so much. I like this. I kind of like this one better because it's the Center for Post-Adventure Hobbits. So this is an HTML document, okay? So it's marked up using HTML tags that tells the system how to display this information. Okay, so the H1, H2, that tells us the size of these headers, whether it's bigger or smaller. The P for paragraph, and the little angle brackets, the BR for breaks and so forth. So it tells us how to display this, not necessarily what the information means, right? So we're kind of used to, like with a marked document record saying, like the 245 field, right? The 245 means title statements, essentially, title and statement responsibility area. And that's not what HTML does. It just tells us kind of how to display it, right? So humans have no problems with this. We can see this, we can understand by reading this that, oh, okay, this is, probably the website for the Center for Post-Adventure Hobbits, that it has, dedicated therapists and a secretary, and there's contact information. Oh, I can recognize the phone number here. But remember, computers are stupid, right? They don't understand things unless we tell them what to do. They don't really understand that that 708-555-5678 is a phone number necessarily, because it could be any number, right? There's all sorts of numbers out there. There's ISBN numbers and Social Security numbers, right? Unless you tell it that's a phone number, it doesn't know that, right? Like instinctively, we know that because we're human beings with brains, so we can just kind of look at that and understand that for the most part. But computers don't, and that's really where XML excels. It really identifies specifically what each component of that long paragraph and the contact information really means. It gives it kind of some semantic meaning to it. So here we can say like the company here with the various information about the company, the treatment offered, the company name, the staff and exactly what they do, contact information specifically, here's the phone number, this is email, and so on and so forth. It uniquely identifies each piece of that information. So once again, the same thing with like a MARC record, right? Just like the 245A, that distinctly identifies, the title proper, right? So same thing here. It's just we do it in a slightly different way, right? But using these the opening and closing tags, and most of the time using natural kind of language, right? In this case, English. So this is XML is open source and non-proprietary. It's been a W3C recommendation, Worldwide Web Consortium recommendation since 1998. And XML documents are made up of elements. Okay, that's the basic part of an XML document is the element, and angle brackets are used to enclose element tags. Okay, so each XML element can include, and this is a lot of the stuff that I'm pulling from is from the W3 schools, the Worldwide Web Consortium website on XML, which I highly recommend. Which it's really quite nice, kind of taking you step by step. So I'm kind of pulling a lot from that. An XML element is everything, including a tag start tag to including the element's end tag. Okay, so an element can contain other elements, text, attributes, or a mix of all of the above. Okay, so if that doesn't make sense, let's walk through it. So here's an example. What you're looking at right now is one element. Okay, it's a title, like a title field, if you will. It contains an opening tag, so you see here the title within angle brackets, and a closing tag, which is essentially the same thing as the opening tag, but with a / at the very beginning. So opening and closing. So just the same kind of concept with HTML. If you're familiar with HTML, it has the opening and closing tag. And there's going to be usually, some text in the middle called a value, and then sometimes it'll also have like what's called an attribute, which I'll get to in just a minute. So this entire thing you're looking at is the element. Okay. There. So it includes all this stuff. So it's not just like the opening tag. That's the entire element. So some syntax rules to begin with. If an XML document conforms to the prescribed syntax rules for XML, it is what we call well-formed XML document. Okay, it's well-formed. So all XML documents must have a closing tag. They're case sensitive, so you have to be very careful about capitalization. They must be properly nested, not so much as an issue with HTML, but it is an issue with XML. They must have a root element that contains all other elements. An XML attribute value must be quoted. Okay, we'll get to those in just a minute. And then we must avoid using certain characters. It's kind of picky about that. So here's some examples of this. So all XML elements must have a closing tag. That's one of the first rules for proper XML syntax. So here I'm using my little happy and unhappy faces to make sure it's clear which one's good and which one's bad. Okay, so the first one, like I showed you before, it has its nice little opening and closing tag with the appropriate little characters in there to distinguish the opening and closing tag. Whereas the one without the closing tag, that's a no-no. And the final one, it's close, but it doesn't have that / at the beginning of that, after the opening, little angle bracket and title to show that it's a closing tag. Okay, so you don't want to do that. That's not well formed if you do that. Only the first one is well formed. Okay, and then all XML tags are case sensitive. Okay, so you can't have a tag with like a uppercase L for letter. If you have you determine like the element name is letter. Okay, you can't have letter with an uppercase letter and a lowercase letter kind of mixed together. There's actually two different elements now. If you capitalize the L and have another one that's lowercase, that means that those are two different elements. I mean, it may look to us like, oh, that's the same, but as far as the XML syntax is concerned, it always has to be the same case, the same capitalization or non. So the opening and closing tags must be written with the same case. Okay, so just FYI. Also, they must be properly nested. Like I said, in HTML, this doesn't really apply so much, but in XML, they must be. So you must have here. They have the B for the tag for bold and I for italics. So you must have like the I's inside. So they must be properly nested, meaning that if the I element is opened inside the B element, it must be closed inside the B element. You can't close it outside of the B element if you've opened it inside the B element. So that's really important for XML, which we'll see. I mean, for this example, this is kind of HTML, but example, but we'll see that we need to make sure that since it is very hierarchical, there's a lot of nesting and parent-child elements there. It's very hierarchical. It's really important that you open and close things appropriately within an XML document. Also within an XML document, we must have a root element that contains all other elements. So the parent to all the child elements, we kind of use those terms. So for example, I just made this up, my library, because you don't have to use a particular standard with XML. That's the thing. You can actually create a well-formed XML document with just whatever you want. I mean, as long as it follows the syntax, then it's a well-formed XML document, even if you don't use like Dublin Core or RDA or whatever. So here, my root tag in this case is my library. It's kind of sandwiching, if you will, the rest of the XML information, right? So it's like a tree. They call it kind of XML tree. Our XML documents form a tree structure that starts at the root and the branches to the leaves, if you will. So you have like the root element, and then you can have lots of different children. So you have child, 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 which in turn can have sub-children, if you will. So sub-child. So you can nest. You can have as many as you need, right? Depending on what you're trying to describe. Okay. In this case, if I just want to say, look, I have a single book in my library, and it has this title, then this is really all I need. The title, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Also, you can see I use what's called an attribute here, a title lang equals ing. That's what we were talking about with the attributes, but we'll come back to that in a minute. We can use attributes for greater specificity in what we're kind of talking about with an element. So, but you can see here, I have the opening root tag, the closing one. Same thing if I open up with book, I need to have a closing book tag. Same thing with title. If I have the title elements, I need to have a title closing tag, and so on and so forth. But it's so the parent and child and subchild structure here. Okay. Also, like I said, the XML attribute, and this kind of messed up my formatting. I cursed you, Adobe Connect. This always happens. I use this for my courses as well that I teach online, Adobe Connect, and it always does this to me. I'd like to create the little PowerPoint. The arrows are perfectly pointing to what I want, and then Adobe Connect is my foil. It always seems to mess it up. So those arrows are supposed to be pointing at the first one to that lang, and then the second one pointing to like the ing, E-N-G in quotation marks. That's what's called an attribute. Okay, so the attribute name and then the attribute value. And when you have that, you need the attribute value must be in quotes. Okay, we'll come back to that. Just kind of make a mental note of that. That you can have attributes, but it has to be this structure if you do. Okay, but I'll go into attributes a little bit more in just a minute. Also, you have to avoid using certain characters in XML. So some characters have special meaning, and HTML has the same issue. These are called entity references because they have special, like I said, special meaning. They have a special place in XML's heart, so you can't use them the way you'd like. So, for example, the little opening angle bracket is used for those opening and closing tags, right? So if you use that in the value, right, like if you want to say like if salary is less than 1,000, then you can't do that. You can't use that little the angle bracket in there because it will generate an error. Okay, because it thinks when you have that you're starting a new element when you have that. So you have to actually replace that with what's called an entity reference, a different set of characters of what they mean. And there's only 5 predefined entity references in XML. If you think about it, it's quite good. There's not that many. But that's the less than, the greater than, the ampersand, the apostrophe, and the quotation mark are the ones that you can't actually use in the value. Okay, you have to replace those with this little weird stuff going on the left-hand side of the table to make it legal, to make it valid. Okay, it says only the characters, the less than and the ampersand are the only ones strictly illegal in XML. But the rest it's a good habit to replace them. So, for example, if I were to say if the title of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets had an ampersand rather than an A-N-D written out. You'd have to replace that, and sorry that it's once again messing up my formatting, but you take that ampersand and you replace it with that, the ampersand AMP semicolon instead, okay, to make it well formed. Okay, so you just have to kind of be aware of that. Okay, so this is what we're gonna do. Is we're gonna test this out. I'm gonna test out to see how closely you are paying attention to this. And if you can't catch all of them, it's fine. I just want to see what you can catch. But in this XML document, there are multiple XML syntax errors. I want you guys just to kind of look at them, and when you identify them, just go ahead and type it out. Just type, this is, I see this is wrong. Just go ahead and you go for it. Go for it. Just kind of point out any ones that you notice. Okay, so books versus book. Okay, so right, so we have we have one that's books and then another one that's book, which is fine actually. Those are actually two separate element names, so that's actually not a problem, Nancy. But that's a good catch. So here I'm going back. Okay, so title says so. So the title. Okay, so Laura? What's wrong with the / title in particular? The one that's at the end of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Let me kind of make sure I get that right. So exactly. So the capital T, that should be lowercase because the beginning tag, the opening tag, is a lowercase t for title, and therefore the closing tag should also have a lowercase t. Very, very good. I'm kind of going back a little bit. I'm going to make sure I catch everyone. Okay, so Rachel said okay, right. So perfect. So the one should be one in quotation marks. So remember we talked about with attributes, which I'll explain further about that more in just a minute. But the attribute value should always have quotation marks around them. So perfect. Right, so Dharma, you pointed out the apostrophe in hitchhikers, so that should be an entity reference. The apostrophe is kind of a no-no in XML, so you should replace that. Okay, so no / I'm assuming you're catching the one with author. So Douglas Adams, author, the / should be in that closing tag. Very good. Okay, still trying to catch it. So apostrophe, very good for author. Okay, right, you guys caught the author one. Ooh, Dharma, you caught the creator author one. Perfect. Ah, you guys got good cataloger eyes. Okay, so right, so David Sedaris, I started the field with creator. Then I have a closing tag for author. That's also a no-no, right? So since I used author before, we need to change that creator to author. And then, right, so there's no other creator, so we shouldn't really have that. And then Susan, each book ID should be closed separately. Right, so that, yes. Exactly. If I'm understanding what you're asking, so you can see here the book ID 2 has the closing tag with the / book after where it says creator. The same thing should be done with book ID 1. So book, that element should be closed, have a closing tag with like, / book. So very, very good. Okay, so in quotes, yeah, Cindy, I just caught that you put the my library is not closed as well. So right, so actually I have two instances here where I have not closed out an element. So my library is not closed out, and the first book ID 1 is not closed out either. So yes, so very, very good. I think you guys caught everything. Let me go to my next slide. Yeah. You guys rock, man. You guys rock. You guys caught it all. Right, so here I have the book ID 1 and 2. Those should be, the values of that should be in quotation marks. I replaced the Hitchhiker's Guide, with the apostrophe with the appropriate entity reference, which looks really weird, I promise. But remember, this is kind of the behind the scenes, right? This is not what the actual user is going to see. This is will be translated, if you will, by the system into however you want to display it. Okay, so this is behind the scenes stuff. So it kind of looks weird to us, but this is not what the user will ultimately see. We changed the T of title, the closing tag, to be lowercase to match the opening tag. The / with author, we need that to make it a closing tag. Then we have our the closing for book in my library, and then we change the author, to make it sure that matches with David Sedaris. So very good. Very good. You guys, yeah, you caught it all. And any questions about that? Does that make sense? That we want to make sure that our encoding is valid or well-formed. Really, the term should be well-formed, as sometimes we talk about valid, but that's a little bit slightly different. So awesome job. Awesome job. All right, so that's the basics, and like I said, that we can create any sort of XML document we want with whatever terms we want, and still make it well formed. Okay, and that's fine. But now I'm going to talk a little bit how we can make it more valid, if you will, because we can make it well formed all we want, but if we want to make it a valid document according to specific standards, we need to kind of do some slightly different things. So here I added what's called an XML declaration to the very top of my XML document. So I kind of changed the little example up a little bit here, but you get the point. So here I have the my library XML record. That's my root tag, and then I have the different elements and child and subchild elements here within that. So I'm going to focus here just on the XML declaration for just a minute. This is actually not considered an element according to the W3C. It's not required, actually. It's not even required. It's just recommended by the W3C. But if you do include it, you always want to include it at the very beginning of an XML document. So just to kind of break down what this means, it always begins, with the opening, the angle brackets at the very beginning and end, and also the question marks. So you do need to include the question marks as well. But within that, this tells us what version of XML is used. And if you do include an XML declaration, this is the only thing that's required that you need to include is XML version 1.0. That what character encoding you're using, Unicode in this case, UTF-8 is Unicode, and that's going to be the case for most of the XML documents you're going to encounter, is having that. Okay, yeah, the W3C consortium, it's called the World Wide Web Consortium. It's just kind of, how would you explain that? They're essentially, let me just kind of, so I can get a quick little blurb about them. So it's according to Wikipedia, sorry to have to do that real quick, but it's the quickest way to do it, is the main international standards organization for the World Wide Web. Okay, so they're essentially, it's founded by kind of the founder of the web, Tim Berners-Lee, and they essentially are the ones that kind of, the keepers of the web, if you will, in terms of like developing and maintaining and recommending certain standards that you use on the web. Okay, so think of it this way even. This is a really good question. Think of it this way. It was like the Joint Steering Committee, right? So I don't know if you guys have heard of the Joint Steering Committee, but they're the ones who are kind of like, the keepers of the cataloging standards in a sense, right? So they're the ones who have developed, AACR2 and RDA, and they have representatives from the various, national, like Library of Congress and, the American Library Association and all sorts of things. Exactly, Aaron, exactly. So they're essentially, they're the ones that kind of, they're the ones that they're big on developing and maintaining and recommending standards on the web itself. So they're the ones who kind of develop, the HTML, the XML, and all these other standards out there. So just check out their website, because Aaron's absolutely right. If you ever want to know how to build a website, if you want to know anything about any sort of standard used on the web, that's the place to go. Exactly, Cindy. Exactly. Yeah, they have a lot of really cool, and that's what I'm really hoping to do in the workshop in January, is have you guys use some of these W3C tools, because you can. They have all these really cool tools you can use to check well-formedness of your XML document, and create like HTML and XML and all this stuff. So check out their website. It's relatively user-friendly, quite frankly. They also have the W3 schools as well, which is a little bit differently. It's a W3. I think it's w3schools.com. I think I kind of referenced it earlier, but that's right. It's really great. If you don't have access to like Oxygen or something, it's great. Kind of just a very basic one. So thank you for pointing that out, Eva. Sorry, I shouldn't assume really anything here, but so yeah, thank you as always for jumping in and pointing that out, because not everyone knows the W3C, even though they're quite a presence out there. So. Anyway, there's the XML declaration. You get the point. So, unicorn. Yeah, they're unicorn letters. That's very pretty. Unicode letter characters. Standalone, whether or not the XML document does or does not reference an external DTD or XSD. That's essentially whether or not you're using standards outside of ones that you just completely made up. Okay, so if you're using like Dublin core, mods, or anything else, then you can say like this is not standalone. But you frequently don't even see this. So we typically only use standalone if you're actually using your own stuff to create. Anyway. So getting back to attributes just really quick before we talk about actually using, figuring out if what you have is valid. Attribute values must be quoted here. I've already kind of talked about this, so I'll move on from that. But once again, attributes are very helpful for greater specificity in kind of what we're talking about in terms of the element or the value, quite frankly. So this is a name-value pair that provides additional information about an element, like the entire element, not just the element name. So here, let's just say I've kind of added this to my XML document of my library. So here I have 2 books on my library: Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Interview with the Vampire. And I've decided to say, look, I'm going to make an attribute here to show kind of the category of the book, so that it's science fiction or horror. Okay, so I can do that to kind of say, look, what's in here within this book sandwich here, the book, this book Elements is a horror book. Okay, which is fine. We can do that. We can make any attributes that we want that we think is important. But there's a couple rules regarding attributes. Is that you can't have more than one attribute with a given name. So, for example, you can't have book, category science fiction, category humor. You can have multiple attributes. That's fine. I mean, that happens all the time. You just can't have multiple attributes with the same name, if that makes sense. Yeah, you just can't have like category. You also cannot have multiple values within one attribute. So you can't have, if you want to say that it's both science fiction and humor, you can't put category quote science fiction quote humor. You can't do that. You can only have one value per attribute. So if you do want something like this, you're like, okay, I have Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in my library, but it's both science fiction and humor. I want to make sure I capture that. Well, you perhaps should not use an attribute to do that. Instead, you can just create multiple, sub-elements just for category, for like science fiction and humor, or in this case, we can put subject or like genre or whatever here, whatever you want to call it. But it'd probably be best to just to kind of create additional elements to capture that, as opposed to using attributes, if that makes sense. But otherwise, attributes can be very helpful if you want to specify, this is book 1, book 2, or if you want to specify a particular, let's see, I think I have an example here. Yeah, this is what I was looking for. So here is actually a Dublin core XML document. If we want to specify that we used the W3C DTF, remember we talked about that last time. That's the kind of the structure standard for dates. It's the World Wide Web Consortium. They're everywhere. You didn't realize it, but they're like the overlords, and you didn't even realize it, but they're the overlords of the metadata world. The W3C DTF, we use that to construct this year. So you can say that. You can actually say, look, to construct this value, I use this. So same thing with like DC my type. We talked about that last time for Dublin Core. The term text is from that DCMA type vocabulary. We can specify that. We can specify, the specific vocabulary or encoding scheme that we use to construct the value. So attributes can be very, very helpful in that respect. So getting back to the idea of well-formed versus valid, an XML document can be well-formed without it being valid. That makes sense. But you can't really have a valid XML document without it being well-formed. So, the logic. Yeah. So well-formed means conforms to the generic rules for XML as a meta-language, whereas valid means validated against an XML schema language, which is a formal, machine-readable document to define allowable elements or other aspects of the specific XML language. Okay, so this is achieved using two different things. Here, the W3C XSD, the schema definitions is kind of the more popular way of doing it now, but you can kind of do that either way, a DTD or XSD. But this is the kind of a documents on the web that say, look, this is a specific standard, and this is kind of the rules, if you will, of the standard. So, like for example, Mark has specific rules associated with that. That the field codes are always numbers, 3 digits long. Okay, and that it has subfields that have like the delimiter symbol and then either a lowercase letter or a number. Okay, those are rules associated with a specific standard. So these are just kind of these documents, if you will, machine readable documents that just say, look, these are the rules of the standard, and that if you want to have a valid XML document, you need to follow those rules. Okay, so. Here's just kind of from the W3 website on what schema are used for. Specifically like to provide a list of elements and attributes in the vocabulary, but just essentially this says exactly what I just said. That it tells us, these are the rules, and that if you have a valid XML document, you're following those rules, if you will. Okay? So this, for the one I've been showing you guys, is a well-formed XML document, but it is not valid. It is not valid against any standard out there other than what's in my little mind, right? That I just kind of created this on my own, and that's perfectly fine. I can create a well-formed document, and that's perfectly fine. But if I wanted to make this valid, according to Dublin Core, I would need to have what's in red here, these root elements that essentially tell the system you need to validate what I have here, my elements and my values, or the elements really, against what Dublin Core says is right, okay, what is correct. So that's what all that business at the very top of the XML document, in case you've ever wondered, like, why do we need to have all that stuff? Well, it's really important if you want to make sure that it's a valid document. So just to kind of break down that red stuff, everything in red here, the first one is we've already talked about the XML declaration, so I'll leave that out. But this is the declaration that this document should be validated against a specific XML schema instance namespace. Okay, so just kind of saying, look, I'm validating this against an XML schema. And then the next one is the reference to the Dublin Core metadata elements set namespace, so simple Dublin Core. And then the next one is for the reference to the qualified Dublin Core namespace. And then the last one being, it actually specifies the location of the XML schema file. It always ends with the XSD, the formal machine-readable file that defines all the valid elements and attributes, that are part of that standard. Okay, so each of these is important depending on what you're using, right? So these would kind of change out depending on which standard you're using, right? So as far as since we're on the topic of simple Dublin Core XML, for Dublin Core XML, just kind of the basic one, and this may, some systems that are kind of proprietary systems may have different ways of going about doing this, but in just for the general purposes, element names should be all lowercase using this template with no spaces, so we have, the opening tag and closing tag, just like we talked about before with XML, but we have DC : and then whatever the element name is. Okay, so if I were cataloging this book, Metadata for Digital Collections, we put it, just kind of slot in the DC, the Dublin Core element name. So DC title, DC creator, DC publisher, using that format. So DC : title, no spaces. Okay, right. So that's just for simple Dublin Core. We have that pattern. However, with qualified Dublin Core, it's a little bit different. Instead of, for the simple one, if it's just title, DC title, but if we want to specify that what we have is an alternative title, so we're using one of the qualifiers, we actually use DC terms instead. So as opposed to putting DC : title, we put DC terms : and just go straight into whatever the qualifier is. We don't even need to put title alternative. We just put DC terms : alternative. Same thing with one of the qualifiers for format in Dublin Core is extent. So we just use DC terms : extent if we want to use a qualified Dublin Core. Okay, so it's a little bit different. If we want to use attributes, we can use attributes in Dublin Core. It's a little weird looking to do it, but they say that you should use this XSI : type and then equals DC terms and whatever you're using. So here, if we want to use the internet media types for format, we just use that XSI : type equals quote DC terms : IMT, and just kind of specify whatever we're using to construct the value. In this case, text HTML or the date, or if we want to use the thesaurus for geographic names, and for the spatial coverage, we can do that. Okay. And once again, what I'm hoping that when we get to the workshop, I'll give you guys some kind of more hands-on practice constructing Dublin Core XML documents. And here's just one from the Dublin Core website. There you can kind of see they've kind of broken it down a little bit differently. As opposed to having the strings that kind of have the opening and closing tags on different lines, which is fine. I mean, you can do it that way if you want. There's nothing saying that you can't do that. That's fine. But here, you can see the opening and closing tags for the simple Dublin Core DC title, and then DC terms alternative and all the other good stuff. So, Dublin Core website's not great for checking out the XML, but it is what it is. So, all right, and then just to give you kind of a taste of some other XML-based schemes, so you can kind of see how they differ, because Dublin Core kind of does it one way. I mean, it still uses the XML syntax, but other schemes kind of are for, serve kind of different purposes and kind of look a little bit different. So MODS is Metadata Object Description Schema. It is quite a popular standard And for cataloging digital resources, it's an offshoot of MARC rather. So it's for those of you guys who are more familiar with MARC, this one should kind of feel more comfy, cozy than other standards, because it's an offshoot of MARC. It's kind of based on MARC. It was developed back in 2002, so over 10 years old now, been around. The current version is 3.6. And it was developed specifically to be an XML schema for describing really any sort of resource, okay, any sort of resource out there. Even though it's kind of geared more toward describing digital resources, it can, in theory, be, describe anything, quite frankly. Here's the mod's website. I have the URL kind of in here, there as well. Check out Metadata Object Description Schema. It was developed by the Library of Congress, by the way. So it is, it's developed by the Library of Congress. So it inherits the semantics of MARC, but it's kind of been repackaged, if you will. So in some cases, there are several data elements in MARC that may be brought together into one mods. And it uses language tags as opposed to numbers. And mods does not assume any of the use of any specific cataloging code. And you'll find that if you did feel that Dublin Core was a little bit simple, if you will, it's not very complex. Mods has greater complexity to it, so you feel like you can actually do a bit more with it, but it's not quite as extensive as MARC. So it's kind of a nice middle ground, I find, mods. So as I said, the advantage of it is it's richer than Dublin Core. It's more compatible with Onyx, which is the publisher metadata language. It's more user-oriented than MARC's XML, because MARC XML, because there is, an XML based on MARC, but it's just awkward, quite frankly. It's a little bit awkward, so it's more user-friendly, in my opinion, mods is, rather than MARC XML. And it's simpler than the full MARC format, so you'll find it familiar, but not quite as complex as MARC. So here are the user guidelines, which if you're interested in mods, this is the place you should really go for that. It has all the documentation you need. It describes all the element names and defines them, the attributes you can use. There is a light version of mods as well that is kind of more like Dublin Core. It's not as complex as kind of the full mods set. Which is 20 top elements, where no element is mandatory, but a mods record must have at least one element, which makes sense. I mean, if you don't have anything, then you don't really have a record, right? So you need to have at least one element, whatever one you want. No element is mandatory, and all elements are repeatable except for record info. This is the only element. This is this kind of administrative metadata, so the metadata, if you will, about the record. That's what the record info is part of. And here are the top level elements in mod, the 20. Which some of them are going to be familiar, right? They're very similar to Dublin Core, like title and name, just kind of have a different name to them. But there's some other ones that kind of break down, like description, for example, in Dublin Core. It kind of breaks down that into abstract, table of contents, target audience in a sense. So it kind of breaks things down a little bit more than what you have in Dublin Core, so subject and classification, for example. Notes, so note, table of contents, and abstract all kind of map to Dublin Core, which, by the way, I just want to come back to that one I just saw. There is a really nice conversion, a mapping that they have on the mods website. If you're curious how, the Dublin Core elements map to mods and vice versa, and how MARC maps to mods. They have a nice mappings here, so you can kind of see that. Okay, what do I have, information in the 490 field of my record. Where would that go in mods? So that's very helpful in that regard. And not everything maps perfectly, right? So these are all different standards, right, for different purposes. So it may not always map perfectly. As you can see here, the mod structure is nested, hierarchical, parent-child elements, just like we were talking about earlier with the XML, where we have main elements and sub-elements and attributes. So here, we could actually specify in mods that we have a title and a subtitle, which we can't do really with Dublin Core. Same thing with if we want to break down a name. We can break it down a name, but if you have a full name Ash Amin, we can actually break that down using mods, using the attributes, given name and family name. if we want to do that. We'd actually specify the role, like this person is the editor of this work. We can specify that where it's a little bit more awkward to try to do that in Dublin Core. So it's really much richer in that sense. We could say a lot more using these mods. Elements and sub-elements and attributes, okay? So much richer in that regard, but it's definitely a lot more nested. It's because Dublin Core is very flat, really. It's very, very flat, and this one's not. And here I just wanted to give you another example. This is from a class, my metadata class that I teach. I have them create mods and Dublin Core XML documents. And just recently, I was so happy yesterday, oh my god, because I recently received grant funding to purchase Oxygen, which is this really great, robust program that you can use for XML creation and conversion there, and I finally got the money to kind of purchase that for my classes, which I know they were kind of far behind, but I was very, very happy. So we actually got to play around with it in class yesterday, and so you can see here, this is just kind of another glimpse of the mods record, rather, with the different elements and sub-elements and attributes you can use. Here with the root elements at the very top, and within Oxygen you can actually validate. Not only can you check if it's well-formed XML, but whether or not it's valid against the mod schema, which is very, very helpful. So if you guys are interested in kind of playing around with that, I highly recommend Oxygen. Here's the URL for this if you want to get a trial version. It's a 30-day trial for free. You can check it out and kind of play around and kind of see if you guys are, if your library is kind of playing around with XML documents, and you don't have this, there are free editors out there if you want to use those, which are fine, but none of them are quite as powerful. They have the functionality of Oxygen, so check that out. And then finally, since we don't have all the time, I'm just giving you a taste. Remember, I'm just going to give you a taste of these schemes, and I really want to go into more hands-on detail in the workshop. But here's another taste of another XML-based scheme called EAD. It is encoded archival description, which is really designed for encoding finding aids. Okay, so for those of you guys who are not in the archival community, who don't know what a finding aid is, finding aids are inventories, indexes, or guides that are created by archival and manuscript repositories to provide information about specific collections. So they document what's in the collection, provenance information, the scope of the collection, inventory control. Because in archives, right, typically you have collections of stuff. Right? They're not just solely single resources or just original digitized versions of a resource, but you have all sorts of stuff within archival collections, right? And that's difficult. There's kind of and here's just an example of a paper finding aid that kind of gives like the title of the collection and then the various parts of the archive, but because of this, the nature of archival material is stored in collections, so like in boxes and folders, and sometimes multiple boxes and folders. You want to have some sort of clear indication of the hierarchy of that material, which is not something that's easy to do within existing standards like MARC or mods. Okay, it's not really good at kind of representing what we call series, and in their archival community they kind of refer to this as a series, which serves as kind of a means of intellectual or physical organization of the collection, so maybe multiple boxes or folders. Okay, so if you have that, if you have something where you kind of have, look, I have this one box containing this stuff, and another box containing this stuff, and in this box you have this folder, and this folder, and maybe in this folder you have something else, and blah blah blah, and it'll, so it gets very complicated and very, very, very quick. So the goal of EAD was to standardize this process, capture the hierarchy, and make these finding aids available and searchable online. Okay, so finding aids, within a particular collection and across repositories as well. Okay, so it kind of captures that structure, from the general to specific, the hierarchical structure of archives, and it makes it easier to encode that online. Okay, because paper finding aids have been, they've been around forever. All right, let me show you, Nancy, let me show you. Here's the EAD website, and here I have the URL here. So check out the website and take a look at this. I do talk a little bit about EAD in my metadata class, but I mean, that's a good question. So it's really it's the Society of American Archives alongside like Library of Congress who are kind of in charge of this particular standard. So maybe, I mean, I'm not really involved with SAA, you know, the Society of American Archives myself, but maybe they do have like specialized courses or like webinars or something on EAD specifically. Because I wasn't really planning on having a webinar just on EAD, but definitely check out the website and check out the SAA to see if they have a way to kind of, you know, learn EAD on your own. And then, you know, if you know XML a little bit, I mean, it's really not, I'm going to just kind of show you. Here's within an EAD document, which, by the way, typically we don't, you know, hand code an EAD document. Usually you kind of use specific templates to create them because because they're complex, right? You know, finding aids can get very detailed and complex. Okay, good. So this way, once again, it kind of captures that hierarchy. You know, so here just a screenshot of the beginning of an EAD document, XML document. You can see kind of that the XML syntax and the structure, but you can really see it here. I have they use this like this CO1 and CO2 and so forth to kind of capture, you know, the hierarchy, like the box and folder. Okay, this is the box, and then we have this level and this level and this level. It really captures that. The hierarchy there, and you know, and what's in this container, and then okay, what's in this container, and then what's the title of this one, and so on and so forth. So, so it's really good for that. Which, like I said, in other standards, it's just really difficult to do that. But this is specifically designed to capture that archival, you know, collection structure. So what I recommend is checking out these resources if you're interested in looking into this further. You know, for like an EAD, for example, that website, mods, the W3 schools. Once again, these have great tutorials for various standards out there. I also find this book at the very top is also somewhat helpful for learning more about XML if you want to learn about that. And like I said, I'm hoping, and I promise I'll get the you know, the description posted soon. Of the workshop in January where you can actually play around with some of this stuff, because I'm going to require that you bring a laptop and that you actually have you know, Oxygen if possible on your computer, so that we can actually create some XML and you know, get your hands dirty essentially and kind of work with that stuff to kind of get I know I will and yes, you'll get the PowerPoint. I think Aaron always sends it out yeah, as like a PDF after the webinar. So anyway, any questions? I finished within even starting late. I finished early, and that's because I cut out a little bit of stuff that I was hoping to talk about that I knew I wouldn't have time for, but we can cover that in the workshop about, you know, interoperability and crosswalking and harvesting and stuff like that. I'll talk more about that at the workshop, I promise. But any questions about what we covered here today? You know, anything on your mind? Yeah, please do. Road trip. Come visit lovely Fort Myers, and I'm excited about going to Fort Myers in January. I'm really excited about escaping the Chicago winters, quite frankly. Actually, it's the temperature's dropped here. It's in the 50s right now. Let's see, what does my little temperature gauge say here? According to this, it's like, what, 50, no, is it 53 right now? 57, I don't know, the high is 57. Anyway, it's cold. It's colder than there. Let's put it that way. Oh man, 89, that's good. Okay, so Laura, so editors for XML. Actually, there are, Laura. In fact, I'm going to post this really quick, but since we have a little bit of time, if you want to, I'm sure that there must be one for, hold on, for just generating XML, which I believe you can do on the W3C website. But there's this really cool Dublin core. Where do you guys go? There's a really cool Dublin core generator, XML generator. You can use, I just posted that URL right there if you want to generate Dublin Core XML. I'm sure that if you Google it, I'm pretty sure, I always make my students just kind of code directly into XML. I don't like them using generators just because I want them to see the code, but I'm sure that if you Google, I know for a fact, in fact my student told me that there's like a mods XML generator out there, I'm pretty sure. I need to track that down. But yeah, there are generators out there if you just kind of do a Google. But this one in particular, the Dublin core, you can actually generate simple and qualified Dublin core in XML using that link I just posted. So.
All right, well, I'm going to close out the webinar. Thank you, Dr. Snow, for a wonderful webinar. We were very lucky to be able to participate in this learning opportunity. Some great information and a sneak peek of what is coming up. Attendees, I would like to remind you that next week, on Thursday, November 12th, we will have Swiftland's DGRF Academy Webinar 2, where we'll be exploring the reference interview with Dr. Naomi Gold. We will also have our second webinar of Diversity Discovery Institute, which will be on November 20th, where we will be exploring identity with Dieta Jones. Also, we hope you all will be able to join us on January 28th of 2016 at the Swiftland office in Fort Myers for Dr. Snow's workshop, beginning metadata for digital resources. We hope you are able to join us for these opportunities in the coming months and in the new year. So please feel free to check our CE calendar on our website, the Florida statewide training calendar, our Facebook page, on Twitter, or look for your message from the Florida listserv. Thank you so much and have a wonderful weekend. Yay, great job, Karen.
I was able to recover there after we've been having some internet problems lately, so sorry about that, man. I should have done that much earlier, but yeah. Okay, but good. I'm glad it worked out. So, whew. Cool under pressure. Yeah, thank you for bearing with me on that. What?